Welcome back to Contact Pod for another deep dive. We're continuing our series, Wharton Professor's Forecast 2025, and in this one we're going to be talking about Professor Jeremy Siegel, and we got his insights from a Knowledge at Wharton interview he did recently, and I got to say some really fascinating predictions in here, particularly when it comes to the stock market and, kind of the ripples from President-elect Trump's policies.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me right off the bat was Professor Siegel's prediction about the stock market kind of cooling off in 2025, which is really interesting because we've seen such strong performance over the last couple of years.
I know it seems kind of counterintuitive, especially with those gains, exceeding 20% each year for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
To hear him talk about potential returns, between 0 and 10% for 2025, it really makes you wonder, what is he seeing that others aren't?
Right. Well, he definitely acknowledges that strong performance, but sees a few factors that could kind of lead to a bit of a slowdown. And one of the things he points to is a potential slowdown in the tech sector. Tech has been a huge driver of market growth, but Siegel suggests that it might ease up a bit due to increased competition and a potentially slower adoption of AI than a lot of people are anticipating.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes you think about companies like NVIDIA, right? They've been riding that AI wave pretty successfully, but could they face real competition in the coming years? I mean, do you think they can kind of maintain their dominance, or will we see new players emerge?
It's a good question. There's always the possibility of disruption in tech, and AI is just such a rapidly evolving field. So yeah, maybe existing players like Google or even startups we haven't even heard of yet could start challenging NVIDIA. It's going to be fascinating to see how that competitive landscape shifts.
It will. And the other big question mark, I think, hanging over everything is, the uncertainty around President-elect Trump's policies.
Yeah.
Professor Siegel highlighted tariffs and immigration as, real potential game changers for the market.
Yeah, those are definitely some big unknowns at this point, and it sounds like there's not really a clear consensus on what they'll look like or how extensive their impact might be. He even compared it to something the Fed chair said recently about there just being no way to act preemptively when it comes to these policies. So it's kind of like we're all in wait-and-see mode.
Right. But it's not like there's no clues at all, right? I mean, Professor Siegel talked about the reaction from small businesses, and that seemed pretty telling.
Yeah, he mentioned the National Federation of Independent Businesses Sentiment Indicator, which actually saw some significant jumps after Trump's previous election. So it seems like smaller businesses are optimistic about the potential for deregulation, which might mirror some of the trends we saw during his first term.
Yeah, I wonder if we connect that to the specific industries like healthcare or manufacturing or energy. How might those be affected by deregulation? It seems like some sectors could benefit more than others, and there's just a lot of potential for volatility there.
For sure. And that's really the key takeaway here. We need to stay informed and adaptable as these policies unfold because different sectors are definitely going to experience varying degrees of impact. It's something worth keeping a close eye on.
Absolutely. Now, moving beyond Trump's policies, Professor Siegel also discussed, the Federal Reserve's potential actions, which is always a topic that gets people talking.
Yeah, he did. And he made a pretty intriguing prediction, a hawkish cut in December of 2024, followed by a pause to really evaluate both the effects of Trump's policies and the trajectory of inflation.
A hawkish cut. It sounds like trying to have your cake and eat it too. Can you break down what that means exactly?
Sure. It's a bit of a nuanced move, as you said. It might sound contradictory, but essentially it means that the Fed would lower interest rates, but they would also strongly signal that they're going to be cautious and observe the effects before making any further adjustments. That's like a balancing act. They want to stimulate the economy, but also not let inflation run wild.
So it's like tapping the brakes while still keeping an eye on the road ahead.
Exactly. And the interesting part is that Siegel expects fewer rate cuts in 2025 than many might anticipate, maybe only a total of 50 basis points, which would leave rates higher than the Fed's own long-term estimates.
I'm sensing a theme here. A lot of uncertainty and wait and see. It feels like 2025 is going to be a year where careful observation and really strategic adjustments are going to be key.
That's a great observation. And it highlights just how important it is for all of us to stay informed and be flexible when we're making financial decisions.
Yeah, that reminds me, Professor Siegel also mentioned that he believes the natural interest rate is actually higher than what the Fed currently thinks. What implications could that have?
Well, he suggested that this could push long-term bond yields up, potentially to a range of 4.5% to 5%. That's a pretty significant jump from where we are now and could have a ripple effect on various financial markets.
That makes me think about my own situation. I've been considering refinancing my mortgage, but now I'm wondering if I should wait and see how these potential interest rate changes play out. It's a lot to consider.
It certainly is. And these are exactly the kinds of critical thinking questions that this deep dive is meant to inspire. It's not just about absorbing the information, but understanding how it connects to our own lives and choices.
Absolutely. It's kind of wild to think about all these economic factors swirling around. And
Yeah.
one thing from Professor Siegel's forecast that really stuck with me is something that I think sometimes gets overshadowed when we talk about the economy, but has huge implications for all of us.
I think I know what you're getting at cybersecurity.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's something Professor Siegel seems really concerned about, and rightfully so.
He painted a pretty stark picture, too. Imagine waking up one morning and trying to log into your bank account, your brokerage accounts, and they're completely locked out.
Hmm.
And it's not just you. It's a nationwide cyber attack affecting everyone.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that really hits home. We live in such an interconnected world these days. Our digital systems are everywhere, and I think we often take that access for granted. But what happens when those systems are compromised? I mean, the potential for disruption is enormous.
It's a real wake-up call. And what makes it even more concerning is that it's not just about potential financial losses. It's about the disruption to everyday life, the potential for panic, the erosion of trust in institutions.
For sure. I mean, Professor Siegel really made a strong argument that we need to start prioritizing cybersecurity investments alongside traditional military preparedness. The threats we face today aren't just physical anymore. They're digital, and they can be just as damaging, if not more so.
It makes you wonder, how prepared are we as a society for something like this? I know I haven't given it nearly enough thought. Have you taken any steps to protect yourself,
Yeah.
your personal data, your online accounts? It's something I think we all need to be taking more seriously.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we need to move beyond just awareness and start taking concrete steps to protect ourselves. Strong passwords, two-factor authentication, being wary of phishing scams, regularly updating software. It might seem like a hassle, but the potential consequences of not doing it are much worse.
Couldn't agree more. Now, before we shift gears, I do want to touch on the global landscape, which is always a factor in these economic forecasts. And Professor Siegel had some interesting thoughts on that as well.
Right. He pointed out that, potential settlements in Ukraine and Gaza, those could actually help reduce uncertainty and have a positive effect on the markets. But at the same time, he acknowledged the ongoing tension with China over Taiwan. That remains a potential risk factor.
So it's like this mix of potential positives and then these lingering uncertainties.
Yeah.
It's a complex web.
It is.
All these interconnected events happening all over the world.
Hmm.
And it makes you realize that, what happens in one part of the world can really have ripple effects across the globe.
It's true, and that's why it's so important to consider the broader context when we're analyzing the economic outlook. We're not just looking at these isolated data points. We're trying to understand how all the pieces fit together and influence each other.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
I got to say, I find myself getting drawn into these, geopolitical discussions more and more.
Mm.
It's hard to ignore how much they shape our lives, even if we're not always aware of it.
I agree. And that's something we want to encourage here at Contact Pod, curiosity and engagement with these complex issues. We're all in this together, and the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that are ahead.
Absolutely. So, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the stock market to cybersecurity, the global landscape. I mean, it's a lot to digest.
It's been a whirlwind.
Definitely. But hopefully a thought-provoking one. And we'd love to hear from our listeners.
Yeah.
What stood out to you the most in Professor Siegel's predictions? What are your biggest questions or concerns about 2025 and beyond?
We're always eager to hear your perspectives and continue the conversation.
So we've talked about a lot, the stock market potential policy shifts, the Fed's balancing act, even the looming threat of cyber attacks. It's a lot to process. But before we wrap up our deep dive into Professor Siegel's insights, I wanted to touch on one more thing he brought up, something that I feel like always sparks a lot of debate and maybe even some anxiety: the rise of artificial intelligence.
Ah, yes. The AI revolution. It's definitely a topic that captures the imagination and raises some big questions about the future of work. And Professor Siegel didn't shy away from addressing those concerns. I think his perspective offers a really valuable way to think about the changes AI might bring.
Yeah. Whenever AI comes up, I feel like people tend to jump to these extreme scenarios. Robots taking over all the jobs, mass unemployment, this dystopian future where humans are obsolete. But Professor Siegel seemed to have a more nuanced view.
Oh, absolutely. He cautioned against falling into those simplistic robots versus humans narratives. The reality he believes is likely to be much more complex and, dare I say, optimistic.
I'm glad you said that, because honestly, those doomsday scenarios can be a bit overwhelming.
Understandable. But instead of thinking about AI as this force that will, eliminate jobs, Professor Siegel suggests we shift our focus. He sees AI as a tool with the potential to really transform jobs, not necessarily eliminate them altogether.
So it's not about jobs disappearing, it's about jobs evolving.
Exactly. AI might automate certain tasks, especially those that are repetitive or routine-based. And yes, that could lead to some displacement, particularly in sectors heavily reliant on those types of tasks. But the flip side is that AI can also augment human capabilities, creating new roles and boosting productivity in ways we might not even be able to imagine yet.
So it's not a zero-sum game, where
Yeah.
robots win and humans lose.
Yeah.
It's more about adapting and evolving alongside this new technology.
Precisely. And this is where things get really interesting. Professor Siegel emphasized the importance of focusing on skills that complement AI rather than trying to compete with it directly.
Hmm.
So this means emphasizing things like creativity, critical thinking, complex problem solving, those uniquely human qualities that are difficult for machines to replicate.
That's a really empowering message, don't you think? It's not about being afraid of AI,
Yeah.
it's about understanding its potential and figuring out how we can leverage it to create a better future.
I completely agree. And that's really what we're all about here at Contact Pod, empowering you with the knowledge and insights you need to navigate this rapidly changing world.
It's not about predicting the future with absolute certainty. It's about exploring possibilities, engaging in thoughtful conversations, and being prepared to adapt.
Well said. And on that note, we want to thank all of you for joining us on this deep dive into Professor Siegel's 2025 forecast. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And please keep those questions and comments coming. We love hearing your perspectives and engaging with this amazing community. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Contact Pod for more insights and explorations.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing, stay curious, and embrace the possibilities that the future holds.